There's a scale here that we've never experienced before. If you add 1 qubit, a quantum bit is the unit of computation. If you add just 1 to a quantum computer, you just doubled its power. We've never experienced that before. You know, we would go from a gigahertz processor to 1.1, that's a 10% bump, and no. If you hear about a 100 qubit quantum computer and 101, that's a significant achievement. It's double the power. So it's exponential growth.
You're listening to the ISF podcast for your organization's better cybersecurity. Your host, ISF CEO Steve Durbin, is an expert in leadership, business culture transformation, and cyber strategies for today's top enterprises. I'm producer Tavia Gilbert. In today's episode, Steve speaks with quantum computing expert Konstantinos Karagiannis, Director of Quantum Computing Services at Prodiviti, where he helps companies prepare for quantum opportunities and threats. Konstantinos talks to Steve about how this nascent technology is already a security concern and what security leaders can do now to prevent problems down the road. He also offers ideas for overcoming the skills shortages that both the security and quantum computing fields face.
Konstantinos, thanks very much for stopping by the studio today.
Absolutely. It's an exciting day to be here and happy to be in the studio too.
Fantastic. I wanted to talk to you about quantum computing. Now, you're on the leading edge of technological development, so while many people are still focused and talking about artificial intelligence and the impact that's going to have, you're moving way beyond that, so you're talking quantum. So tell us about that. What's already arrived and what's in the future? What's to come?
Yeah, what's interesting is artificial intelligence and machine learning, that's actually 1/3 of quantum use cases.
Okay.
So it works for optimization, machine learning, and simulation. So I constantly get to touch that world, but yeah, like you said, we're looking way ahead here. So what we have now are these machines in the noisy intermediate scale quantum era, or the NIST era as we call them. They're still temperamental. You still have to run them many times and then compare answers to see what the right one is. But we can still do some amazing things with them today, and we can extrapolate the kinds of things we'll be able to do with them tomorrow. So it's a very viable field, even though it sounds futuristic.
So give us some examples, because I remember some years back now looking at, in our Threat Horizon series, we pulled quantum out as being one of the threats for the future. Give us some examples of the sorts of things that we could expect to be doing with this technology.
Yeah, so for now, it's more of the promise. Like
right.
Quantum computers, if they get they will, when they get just a little better over the next couple of years, we'll be able to do things like supply chain optimization of portfolios. I've already written a paper on that, successes we've had in that space. We'll be able to do better fraud detection, better things like option pricing. Mm-hmm. We'll be able to simulate chemicals to greatly advance material science and even medicine. Possibly even help the environment, because we'll be able to do better carbon capture or things like that. So there's all these amazing things we'll be able to do in the short term. But then when these machines pass a certain tipping point, mm-hmm. that becomes this global worry moment where all of a sudden you can factor really large numbers with a quantum computer. And factoring really large numbers is supposed to be impossible, which
right.
is the basis of RSA and public key infrastructure.
So you talked there about some things that clearly security people are always concerned about, mm-hmm. things like threats, bad actors. Do they have access to quantum computing as well?
Some of them definitely do. So right now, most attacks are in the form of harvest now, decrypt later.
Right.
We're all focused, but the bad actors are focused on gathering packets, mm-hmm. Depending on their source. And the hope is that when a quantum computer reaches that power level in, let's say, 10 years, some of those secrets might be relevant. State secrets, corporate secrets. If you were to send Coca-Cola over the wire in 10 years, you'd have quantum Coca-Cola, when it's decrypted. Yeah. But some secrets don't matter. Like a credit card that's captured now, who cares? In 5 years even, it's not worth anything. So that's that general progression of attack. But we also are worried about what those actors are. And if they are a nation state, mm-hmm. like let's say China, right. we know for a fact China is publishing more scientific papers on quantum than any other country. Right. And they've also passed that magical threshold in science of being cited more often. So you'll find Chinese papers being cited more often than other countries too. Right. That means clearly they're doing very well in quantum technology. Yeah. So it's feasible that if China being the structure it is now, where the government does tend to have access to a lot of the technology, they should have access to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer at some point.
And people listening to this may be thinking, well, should I be worried about that? So should we?
Everyone should be worried because this is the kind of thing that will be hard to police. Quantum computers are going to be on the cloud. It'll be very hard to determine what you're really using them for. And it's feasible that secrets being captured today will mean something in the future. You have to think of the lifetime of a secret. In the healthcare field, for example, the lifetime is, not surprisingly, a lifetime.
Right.
Insurance, a lot of financial secrets, like we said, all those other type secrets before. So once you know the lifetime of a secret and you add on the number of years it takes to switch cryptographic technologies, you get a pretty big number. And quantum computers are going to start revealing secrets one day. It's just a mathematical certainty at that point.
So what should we be doing about it today to avoid this problem that we're sitting here looking at for tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a good question. In 2024, NIST will be releasing cryptographic ciphers to replace RSA and some others.
Right.
It'll be time for companies starting in 2024 to start their plans for migration. In the US, the White House has already telegraphed what's going to be expected of federal agencies. They published the NSM-10 memo, which states that once the finalists are out, you have to have a plan for migration, the timeline for deprecation of ciphers. All these steps are going to kick in. And we expect that regulators are going to just cut and paste that.
Right.
They're not going to do the research all over again. It's like, oh, the White House spent dozens of millions to develop this plan.
Yeah.
Guess what? Financial industry, you have to do this. Healthcare industry, you have to do this. So everyone's going to have to plan their migration starting as soon as next year.
Wow, that quickly.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me, as somebody who is probably on the receiving end of a lot of this regulation, increasingly board directors are having to try to familiarize themselves with a whole range of different regulations that are coming out, that it's going to be pretty hard for me to understand what some of the implications of this might be, because for the average board director, quantum is not something that we talk about on a daily basis, right? So how can we help them understand some of the implications? Because it's all very well saying this is regulation, you've got to comply with it. But unless we can answer the question why, it's very difficult to get people to comply with things.
Yeah, you have to consider your audience always.
Right.
And one of the things that I always think about is if something is on a timeline to be deprecated, it's about to become a serious headache.
Right.
And we've seen this in the past, right? Like some ciphers would stop. For example, do you use SSL anymore? No. You use TLS 1.2 and 3.
Right.
There's a reason for that. Those ciphers are deprecated. You start getting dinged on pen tests, audits, annual compliance. All that just becomes a nightmare to deal with. So if you explain it that way, that in the near term, you're going to have deprecation of these ciphers, they're going to have to deal with that. It's going to become an actual boots on the ground problem. That's going to be their headache. So even if they don't believe that quantum computers will ever be powerful enough, it doesn't even matter.
Right.
It's just become a new thing that you have to address.
If you're interested in learning more about the technological implications of automation, machine learning, and quantum computing, download the ISF's report, Threat Horizon 2025, Scenarios for an Uncertain Future, available to members on ISFLIve. Not a member yet? Get in touch with your regional director today at securityforum.org/contact.
Okay. Let's look now at skills. So in the security industry, we've been complaining for some while about the shortage of skills, the shortage of capabilities in that space. It would seem to me that if we then look at AI, we're hearing the same refrain. Quantum presumably is going to give us the same issue as well. So what can we do to prepare the right skills, the right workforce for that? Because you've just made the point that come next year, right, some of these things are going to have to start happening.
Yeah. So there's like the two basic work streams, right? There's the work stream regarding security. So solving the quantum problem from the security side, ironically enough, requires no quantum knowledge whatsoever. Right. You just have to know, literally nothing. If you're a security professional and you're used to auditing ciphers and things like that, you're already a professional. You're set. You're ready to go. So we need the folks that just understand implementing cryptography correctly. Great. Then there's the quantum side where people need to work on the algorithms, solving business problems with quantum computers, those types of things. That skill set's a little trickier. It's like a unique blend of quantum physics, linear algebra, and some machine learning and some coding. It's a little trickier. So I'd like to see more universities develop focus tracks. It's like you could go to school and graduate in 4 years with some kind of like computer science degree that makes you qualified to be a developer at Facebook or whatever, right? You could do that. I don't see any university have that set for a quantum programmer, you know? Like you can't just come out and like, we know that we can hire you to like implement algorithms.
Right.
There's no such thing. And I'd like to see that kind of, you know, preparation. So within a few years, we've got a whole crew of folks ready to at least implement algorithms. They might not be able to create a brand new one, but there's only a few dozen of them in the world anyway. So it's not like there's that many right now.
Right. So given that we aren't going to be able to just, you know, in 4 years' time, turn on this whole resource pool because the universities, to your point, are not doing it, what is it that we can do in order to be prepared for that? Because if the universities aren't going to churn them out, where's the skill set going to come from?
Yeah, so we're going to have to push back on them for sure. Like I go to universities and I talk about this. I kind of give people that advice. I'm partnered with things like Chicago Quantum Exchange, and I end up talking to a lot of young students to help them with this path, because I do want to see these young minds growing in the field. But companies can also reward certain development tracks, right? They could do a better job of having internal training tracks, identifying which pieces of those, like key 4 I mentioned, what do you have and what gaps do you need to fill in, you know? If you're a professional in the field of some kind of development or some kind of scientific field, you could probably adapt to quantum coding within a couple of years. You could probably do it. So you just have to figure out what those gaps are. You know?
Right. And again, some of the people listening to this may be thinking to themselves, well, this is getting a little bit technical now for me. And you know, we've talked about regulation, we're talking about, you know, cryptography. What are some business use cases that people could relate to for quantum computing?
Sure, yeah. Just some of the stuff I've done recently personally. One is portfolio optimization.
Okay.
Finding those points on that efficient optimization curve. We demonstrated how to do that with a quantum computer using something called cardinality constraints. So we were able to mirror the performance of the NASDAQ 100 with 25 assets instead of 100, and the S&P 500 with 50, which is only 10%.
Yep.
So that's like a very practical use case. It saves companies overhead, you know, less management of assets. We use them for fraud detection, better analysis of whether a transaction is good or bad. That comes with its own headaches because quantum computers are shared on the cloud and you can't run them 24/7 for your own purposes. So it's terrible if someone runs my credit card to buy a plane ticket and I don't hear about it till they're already back from their trip.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely, yeah.
So it has its issues right now, but availability will increase over time. Those are just a couple of like real practical examples that I work on.
Right.
But there are tons of others.
And are you finding, when you're working on these practical examples, are you finding resistance from some of the more traditional businesses? So, you know, portfolio management, for instance, so I can imagine that some of the analysts in that space are perhaps looking a little bit carefully at some of the things that are going on and thinking, well, hold on.
Yeah, so sometimes it's done as a proof of concept.
Right. Okay.
Like to extrapolate what you might be able to get in the future as the machines get better.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's done as like a proof of value in one little subset. So like, you know, they have this big complex process, but you just zero in on one part that you know a quantum computer can help with or a quantum approach, and then you fix that. And then maybe in the future, they'll add other pieces too. So we do those like kind of like very targeted projects.
Now, let's sort of switch gears a little bit here. We know that computing capability is increasing. We know that cloud requires energy. We know that quantum requires more energy than normal computing. And yet we're faced with challenges around global warming. And how is that all going to fit? Are we creating another problem for ourselves by moving down that road? Or is there some, you know, easy answer that
there is.
Great.
Yeah, there is an easy answer. So quantum, first of all, won't replace classical. They're always going to work hand in hand. You're not going to run like Microsoft Word on a quantum computer. It'll only do what it does with algorithms. And even though they use a lot of power for the refrigeration and everything needed, because quantum computers need to be colder than deep space, they're so efficient at what they do that you measure in, you know, trillionths of a second a calculation and it's done. So if you run a quantum computer for a minute, you just solved probably all your business's problems for an entire, you know, year that you can never even dream of. I have 20 minutes of cloud time on one type of quantum computer monthly, and I've never even approached it. I've never even had to use it.
Wow.
Because we measure in, like, you know, like I said, nanoseconds or, just very tiny little fragments of time. So they are in that way more efficient, because a supercomputer costs millions of dollars to run a month, and you're only getting normal operations out of them.
Right. Yeah. So is your sort of vision of the future with quantum, you mentioned cloud earlier, is your vision an environment where we have a small number of these and we're selling effectively a certain amount of time on it that a business is buying, to your example, 20 minutes a month, could be more, could be less, depending on what you're doing, of course. Is that the way that you think the industry will evolve?
I think so. For most businesses will make sense. Quantum computers are going to be temperamental for quite a while.
Right.
There's parts that are going to be breaking down, and you just don't want this on-prem usually. Also, if you're ever worried about things being outdated quickly, I'm not buying a laptop, it'll be outdated. Well, yeah, nothing gets outdated like a quantum computer.
Right.
There's a scale here that we've never experienced before. If you add 1 qubit, a quantum bit is the unit of computation. If you add just 1 to a quantum computer, you just doubled its power. We've never experienced that before.
Right.
We would go from a gigahertz processor to 1.1. That's a 10% bump. And no, if you hear about a 100 qubit quantum computer and 101, that's a significant achievement. It's double the power. So it's exponential growth. So why would you want to spend several million to own something that in 2 months will be, orders of magnitude weaker than, something else? It's far better.
Is cost going to be a barrier to entry though? Because I should imagine that the people who've got these quantum computers in the future are going to be able to charge premium price, right?
Yeah, you run shots, right? So you could do simulations. Quantum works well in simulations. You could simulate up to like 50 qubits, let's say, and you can make sure your algorithm works right, and you can torture test it. And then when you're ready to actually run it, that's when you pay for what we call shots, which is just runs on a quantum computer. So yeah, you might work on this, tweak it all month, and then you spend $1,000, let's say, and you do your runs, and you're good. You're done.
Okay.
That's it, yeah.
So looking back then into the security space in particular, what do you think some of the key benefits are of quantum computing from the security professionals' standpoint? Some real specifics would help.
Absolutely. That fraud detection use case I told you about before, we're looking at adapting that to indicators of compromise.
Okay.
So right now, it's pretty hard for machine learning even to detect indicators of compromise. And you'll still have APTs that'll live on a network for a couple hundred days before they're detected. So we talked about the problem of running quantum computers all the time, but even if once a week, you could run a really sophisticated algorithm on a quantum computer that could detect those edge cases and spot an APT, let's say, 7 days is way better than 200.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why we're looking to adapt that SVM and QSVM model to detecting indicators of compromise.
And the early adopters are going to be government, financial services, healthcare?
Yeah, those are some. And then we're seeing like oil and gas are interested, and any kind of material science. I personally don't get involved in any kind of like chemical simulation or anything like that. That's just highly specialized.
Right.
But there's Boeing, for example, they've used quantum to help layer the way carbon fiber can form more flexible wings. They're using quantum technology for navigation for when GPS goes down. Because with quantum sensing, you could get down to like a 1 atom resolution. So a gyroscope with that kind of resolution can remember where it is for way longer than a traditional gyroscope.
So a future then that has a whole range of different options, I suppose, different possibilities are really going to be opened up for us. And I suppose the challenge, as we've said, is for us to try to educate not just ourselves, but those who are coming after us in the workforce to be able to take advantage of that opportunity and to really make it work for the positive as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like AI exploded in the past year, right? And it's almost a shame that it took away so many of the quantum headlines that were forming because a lot of people forgot. I find myself having to like kind of restate things again because for a year everyone's like, oh yeah, quantum, no, shiny thing, AI. But even quantum can vastly accelerate AI. There's quantum techniques that can make large language models smaller and run on simpler devices instead of costing millions of dollars to train. There's other synergies there too. So the whole world can be benefited by it, and I just think we really need to embrace it because it'll be many years before they're actually cracking encryption, and all those years beforehand we could just reap all these benefits. I mean, they might literally save the planet before they destroy cryptography.
And on that positive note, that's probably where I think we'll end it. Konstantinos, thanks very much indeed in shining a bit of a light for people in terms of where quantum is today and where it's going. And of course, on that very positive perspective that you've given us at the end there. So thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
If If you found value in the conversation today between Konstantinos Karagiannis and Steve Durbin, please take a moment to give the ISF podcast a 5-star rating and share this episode. Get in touch with Steve directly at steve.durbin@securityforum.org or linkedin.com/in/Steve Durbin. Check out all our media and resources. All of it is there to support you at securityforum.org. Don't miss the ISF Analyst Insight podcast, sharing conversations with members about the real-world applications of ISF research. The ISF podcast is produced by Talkbox Productions and Tavia Gilbert. Thanks for listening.